Some of the top intermediaries in my social investment sticker book are represented, so it's a wonderful honour. And as you will have seen from the promotional material, what we're doing here is discussing the question: social investment, friend or foe? Social investment, it's been around for hundreds of years and been around in a big way for 3 or 4 now. Lots of people have lots of opinions about it. Generally, we have conferences where people who think it's great turn up and say it's all going brilliantly, or over the last year or two we've had people who think it's great turn up and say it's mostly going brilliantly. What we're going to have now is some people who think social investment is quite good, some people who don't think it's very good, and one person who's even taken on some social investment for a social enterprise, which is a novel thing. The format of this is going to be along the question time lines, which is you will ask questions and the panel will say things in response to them, roughly. But what we're going to do first is I'm going to ask the main question, the initial question. Oh no, we're going to do something else. As you may have seen on your seats, you will have found these bits of paper. They say friend on one side, foe on the other. So I think David is very keen that we begin with a straw poll, just to see what social impact we've had over the course of the event. So what we're going to kick off by doing is to see who, at the beginning of this event, believes that social investment is either a friend or a foe. So shall we start by showing our bits of paper? Are you counting these, David?
There are a lot more friends. I think there's only 2 foes. Oh, we're all going to get along.
Might as well go over now then.
Yeah, so
it's a technical win anyway.
Absolutely. So if we have 3 foes at the end of the evening, then Leslie and Kathy have won. So this is brilliant. So what we're going to do firstly, the first question is going to be asking the question: social investment, friend or foe? I'm going to ask each of the panel to give a brief answer to that within a brief introduction to themselves. So I think we're going to go along the line in an uncomplicated order that won't confuse me, and I'll start with Kathy, who's on my right. I better pass the microphone along, that'll make it easier.
Let the microphone drive decisions. I'm Kathy Evans. I'm Chief Executive. Is that working?
Yeah, you have to
I can't hear myself.
It's
some kind of sound. I'm Kathy Evans. I'm Chief Executive of Children England, and Children England is the membership body for children's charities. We were founded in 1942. Most of the really recognisable children's charities that people know the names of: Bernardo's Action for Children, NSPCC, are founding members of our organisation, but we also have lots of small community organisations in our membership. I think I'm here because I was reported as saying some fairly strident things about social investment from a seminar that I was participant in Civil Exchange. I'm not going to deny that I said them or withdraw them, but I think in a forum like this we've got an opportunity to explore nuance, meaning. So for me to be clear, my concern is particularly for the voluntary sector, and I do recognise that the significance, the value of social enterprise as a business model and a way of doing business that can be both highly ethical and productive compared with private companies, and compatible with social objectives, and many of my members are social enterprises. But I was speaking and am particularly concerned about the idea of investment and repayment investment models, which are being driven sold towards the voluntary sector, providing charitable purpose, charitable mission. And I mean, one of the things that I love about the voluntary sector, and I do passionately love it, is its willingness to experiment and to think the unthinkable and to adapt. And I'm all for the fact that we've come up with a myriad of different ways to think about how we can finance social good. And some of them I think are really exciting. I'm really all up for community shares and crowdfunding. This is not about all methods and all experiments, but I'm particularly concerned about repayment and loan finance models and social impact bonds for the delivery of public goods. And I think my particular concern would be to distinguish between whether what we're delivering and funding is a private good, something optional. If you want it, you can get it, but you can get it through an ethical organisation, or a public good, something which people need, have an entitlement to, and should receive as of right. And I think that my concerns about social finance and some of the government's aspirations for what they think it can achieve, or indeed how they think it can reorder the cost borne by government of meeting people's needs, is unsustainable and has some very potentially serious impacts on how we conceive of the people who need our services and need our help and are entitled to those things. So I'm not going to go on too much because I think it's in interaction with all of your points, but I think we have to be very careful about thinking that the public sector pot can repay costs incurred today through savings incurred tomorrow, even from the most effective work. That public spending envelope is looking highly dubious, high risk. Whoever gets in at the next election, or whoever manages to construct some kind of government after the next election, nobody's looking at spending pots that look luxurious or anything other than a dilemma. So I think that I'm very concerned about premising the future of the voluntary sector on a business model that relies on them doing business and sustaining themselves from the public sector. So that's where I'm at, and looking forward to a really good debate.
Me? Right, okay. Hi, Daniel Brewer from Resonance. I thought I'd just tell a bit of my story as to why all I do is social investment stuff. So really I'm an engineer, and I've learned how to do finance on the job. But the reason I got into this was that my experience in engineering business, so it was a food industry, making machines with bits of metal and selling to Kellogg's and others. I thought naively, believe it or not, that I was going to be contributing to feeding the world, when actually I was contributing to confusing consumers. And I couldn't really work out why everybody else seemed to hate the job as well. And I thought, as a 19-year-old, if this is the world of work, then I'm out. So through the kind of 4 years that I endured that in and out of university, I then my diagnosis was really that this was a private business, that was a family-run business that was set up to meet a market need. And the guys on the shop floor building bits of metal were really passionate about solving their customers' problems, building machines that lasted forever. And then gradually it got VC'd up and then PLC'd and then merged to the point where it was a 400 million business that was kind of a bit of an annoying part of what they were doing. And the guys on the shop floor didn't know who they were working for anymore. They thought they should be working for the customer, but they were told to maximise shareholder value. And as I, as a 19-year-old, said, I'm sorry, what's shareholder value? I should have known, but didn't. And they sort of said, oh, it's basically this means this quarter's profits. And I said, what do you mean? What about next quarter's profit? No, that has to worry about itself. And I thought, okay, fine. Product quality, any of those things are important to your shareholders? Well, no, it just, shareholder value doesn't mean what shareholders value, it just means this quarter's profits. I go, well, why didn't you call it that then? Anyway, I kind of got laughed out the room when I said, why don't you just sit your shareholders down with your management team and decide what it is you want to do? Because I thought it was about feeding the world. And I'm sure you could kind of work something out that would be good. So that conversation didn't last very long, and my career in the engineering world didn't last very long. So I'm still quite naive and try and enjoy that with it. But teamed up with a business angel, entrepreneur, a guy called Peter Dool, in 2000, and we did a bit of lobbying together, working particularly around tax and benefit systems, and it was quite interesting. Came across this thing called social enterprise, that was emerging and making a real difference to individuals' lives. Peter, and I was sharing this story with him, and he said, "Oh, that's quite interesting because I've got a small endowment, a few £1 million that he made when he sold his company in '95, and it does two things, both of which I find incredibly frustrating as a trustee." This is him talking. One is that the endowment sits in the hands of a bunch of investment managers in the city and props up a system of exploitation. Sorry, his words. And then I get given a few £100,000 a year, which I then am told to feel good about my life and give to a few charities. And again, his words, it feels like it feeds a system of dependency. Because every time I give them, and I think this is a plausible way of fixing a problem, they come back next year and sort of say, well, you've still got some money, so you should give it to us. And found that very frustrating as a foundation. I said, surely there's a charity that I might want to give £50,000 to, but actually what they really need is a building or an amount of capital that is more like £1 million. And really what they're asking is to try and get six donors who might give £50,000, and we get a £300,000 deposit, which we can then go to a nice ethical bank, borrow £700,000, buy a house. And it all takes 4 years. We miss 8 opportunities in the meantime, and it's really frustrating. And actually, I just buy the whole thing for them. I just buy them the building, lease it to them. Yes, they have to pay us some rent, but if they want to buy it off us over a period of time or not, then we can do that. So suddenly there's a way of all of his money doing something charitable, all of his working for the purpose that he set up his charity for. And that was the seed of resonance. We went out to try and build funds. We then worked out that with one investor, no deal flow, no track record, all you do is waste money on lawyers. And then we became consultants to social enterprises to help them where there was a business model to say, okay, if you can do more of what you do for impact, is there then an ask of somebody who wants to recycle their capital again and again and again to make a difference? And whether that was a business-to-business sale, business-to-consumer sale, or a business-to-government sale, frankly, I remain agnostic about it. But if there is a model that is working and can take the money and then want it back, and then prove by paying it back or delivering a return through a property yield or whatever it might be, that those investors go, okay, well, I put 1% of my available capital into this. That worked, and it did some good. What's the next thing that I can do as an investor? And also, as a social enterprise charity, you've delivered something, you've paid it back, and now you can raise 10 times that amount of money to do 10 times the good that you were going to do as a result of it. So we now run, so we founded Resonance in 2002. We now run 3 funds with £50 million of other people's money that we look after. And we've deployed nearly all of it over the last 3 years. So it's working. It's all designed around experience of working with social enterprises around what they needed and a model that can work. It doesn't all extract its profit from the cash flows of the business. So one of them is a property fund, so it buys property and then sells property, but with the value created through the use of it. And we're designing a number of other funds as well. Sorry, that was probably too long.
Sorry. Hi everyone, I'm Holly Piper. I'm a Senior Investment Manager at Venturesome, and for those of you who don't know us, we are the social investment arm of the Charities Aid Foundation. So that makes me definitely in the friend camp of social investment, just in case there's any confusion. But also, I kind of want to spend a little bit about what we mean by social investment, because firstly, we don't just mean social impact bonds or the really, really exciting, innovative deals that grab the headlines. They're great. There's a place for them. We can probably have a strong debate about exactly what the place is. But actually the vast majority of kind of social investment is just borrowing. It's social organisations, be they charities, BenComs, KICs, like, call them what you will, social organisations wanting to do good who need to borrow money. And whilst kind of those organisations need to borrow money, social investment funds like Venturesome exists to try and meet that demand. And the demand for repayable finance is growing. In some cases I wish it wasn't. It's partly growing because we know there's an increased awareness, so more social organisations around the country are aware that you can borrow money. It's kind of not impossible, it might be kind of a viable option. More than that, more social organisations need to borrow money. So it's a straightened fundraising environment, as I'm sure many of the audience know. There's also contracts are increasingly paid by results. Grants are increasingly paid by arrears. The reserves that many social organisations have, and this isn't even the kind of the newer social organisations, longer established ones, are getting kind of more and more diminished. So there is a greater need than ever, unfortunately, to seek other forms of finance. And social investment can be one of those forms. It's absolutely not appropriate for all social organisations, but it is appropriate for some. And in the kind of the latest research we did, we know that 3 in 10, so 30% of charities across the UK either have experience of repayable finance or are very, very interested and very likely to seek repayable finance in the future. And as a social investment fund, we exist to try and meet that demand. So to make sure social organisations which want capital, be it bridging to a grant, be it to kind of invest in a new service, which will then be revenue generating, which will then pay us back, be it just to bridge a real sticky cash flow issue over kind of the summer, for example, that's kind of what we exist to do, and we try really hard to make it as simple as possible. We also try and make it as affordable as possible, but that's more challenging, I'll be honest. But making it as simple as possible, so straightforward lending. We do some SIBs as well, but actually the vast majority of social investment in the UK is straightforward, unsecured lending.
Hi, my name's Ben Allen and I'm the founder of Oopmh. Oopmh is a social enterprise that runs exercise provision within the care sector. We work in care homes all the way up in the Shetland Isles, all the way down to Brighton, pretty much everywhere in between. So we're in roughly 1,000 care homes at the moment, with roughly 20,000 participants coming to our services every month. We're limited by shares, but we are mission locked by our social investor. So we've got a charitable investor, Nesta, who locks down our mission of our business. So it sort of keeps us honest to what we say we're committing to doing as a business. And I'm very much in the friend camp of social investments.
I thought that was remarkably brief. Can I try and do without this, because I really don't want to make a speech. I'm Les Huckfield. I'm on the board of SenScot, which is the Social Entrepreneurs Network Scotland. I was also asked to appear here tonight by the National Coalition for Independent Action because I wrote a substantial paper on social investment for them. I'm very much in the no camp, and I want to tell you very, very briefly why, because I think the biggest part of this evening ought to be for you to ask questions and not for us to make speeches and presentations. First of all, we have to see this in a rather wider context. It isn't just about making individual investments and individual loans in individual projects. It's got a much wider context than that. The previous Labour government, because don't forget that this all started when Gordon Brown, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, asked Ronnie Cohen to set up the Social Investment Task Force in October 2000. So it's got a very, very long history. And basically what Brown was seeking to do, what New Labour sought to do, and what the coalition is now increasingly seeking to do with a vengeance, is to get private money in various ways into a whole range of third sector organisations to deliver public services. That's the agenda, and we shouldn't kid ourselves about that. It isn't about the one-off investments, which I'm sure we'll all be in favour of and which have been described tonight. It's a much deeper and much more significant political agenda, that the way that you gradually withdraw public provision is to replace it by private or third sector provision, wherever possible funded by private investment. That's what social investment's all about. It's not, as I say, about individual projects. The quite interesting thing is that if you came to Newcastle, certainly if you came to Auchterarder, and I'm glad to find a colleague, by the way, who knows where Auchterarder is, I'm complimented by that. If you came to Scotland, if you came to the northwest, if you came to the northeast, this is probably a debate or discussion which wouldn't take place at all. because this is really a discussion which is taking place only in London and the South East. And that's why, frankly, we can get audiences of this number in a place like this. It isn't a discussion which is taken off at all in Scotland, and it certainly isn't a discussion which attracts that much interest. And the reason that it doesn't attract much interest outside of London and the South East is that most people who work in the third sector, most people particularly who work in social enterprise, know that the main funding need is for loans or some kind of funding of maybe £50,000 to £100,000. The difficulty is that when those organisations are asking for that kind of money, they don't have any collateral, they don't have any assets to give us security. That's where the main demand is. Now, there was a huge study in which Big Society Capital, Big Lottery, and a few others, including Dan Gregory, who's on the board of Social Enterprise UK, that big study of 7,000 organisations in July 2012 said that that's what the main demand is. It also showed that there really weren't any takers in any significant numbers for the kind of prospect that we're talking about tonight. Just to give you some figures, if you have a look at that Boston Consulting Group prophecy in 2013, looking forward to the first billion of social investment. Have a look at the Social Impact Investment Task Force report of September this year, September the 15th, last year, under Ronnie Cohen. That was actually talking globally about the first trillion of social investment. Have a look at Big Society Capital's second annual report in May of this year for the period up until the end of last year. How much social investment did they shift? 13 million quid. And that wasn't even for end beneficiaries. That was for intermediaries. So I have to say to you, where's the success? Where's the rip-roaring takeoff? Where's the great interest? Now let me just be allowed to finish, because if we're going to be having a debate, I would hope that both sides can put their point of view. So far, what have we had? We've had the Cabinet Office putting funding scheme after funding scheme after funding scheme. We've got investment and contract readiness. We've got social outcomes. We've got big lottery money. We've got money all over the place going into this sort of thing. We've got people now changing to say, well, actually, you don't needn't be precisely a social enterprise. As long as you've got a bit of a social mission, as long as you've got a bit of a social purpose, that's okay. So we've had the subsidies, we've had the funding schemes, we're now trying to widen the eligibility. We're now being told that in certain government contracts you're actually going to be required to do what you're intending to do with social investment. We've got tax relief coming on as well. How much more have we got to do to try and make this damn thing work? The trouble is, and people tend to forget this, Big Society Capital's money ain't their money, it's our money. It's actually unclaimed assets in dormant bank accounts. If people out in the wider world knew that this was where their money was going, I tell you this, Farage and company would be hopping mad. You ought to be very grateful that UKIP so far haven't got their heads around this. This is a situation where, following Gordon Brown in 2000, all the bits and pieces that have been done since then, all of the subsidies and the grant schemes from the Cabinet Office, big lottery subsidy, changing the eligibility, social investment tax relief, all the bits and pieces, and as I say, Big Society Capital last year shifted 13 million quid. When's it going to end?
On that note.
And the trouble is, you see, it still isn't answering the real needs of social enterprise. So let's kill it before it actually kills social enterprise itself, because that's the real risk that we're running.
Well, that's a rousing challenge there from Les, and a perfect moment to bring in you. So we'll take some questions, or I suppose, do we take points or just a question?
There's the microphone at the end there.
Well, you're the chair, you can decide.
I can, I've got to, it's a massive position of power, isn't it? Yeah, so yeah, please do raise questions initially. Okay.
Thomas.
Hi, my name's Steve Weiler. And until fairly recently, I was running an organisation called Locality. I'm working independently now. I was also involved in setting up some years ago the Venture Capital Fund, which is now part of the social investment business. I thought the presentations were really good, and I'd like to try and respond to or ask questions really about two things. One is, Kathy, your point about public goods, which I think is so interesting. How should we be financing public goods? The things that we would generally agree people should be entitled to in some way as a right. I agree that there are public goods. I can think of some examples where some very, very good quality enterprises, charities, have been funded through social investment to provide public goods. If I can give one very quick example, the Burton Street Foundation in Sheffield took over a disused school, ran as a traditional charity, trying to raise grant money, working with people with learning disabilities for many years. It was a tremendous organisation, but financially incredibly unstable, always kind of bumping along the bottom. In the end, they managed to, as well as grant money, they managed to attract loan finance from a venture capital fund, and also managed to persuade the council, Sheffield Council, to transfer the building to their ownership. They've now got, I think it's about 30 local businesses operating from their renovated building, and that brings in independent income for them. And they also have massively increased the number of people with learning disability they can work with. A lot of that is funded through kind of direct payments through what's it called, the personal budget. Thanks. And it's thriving, and they've developed a whole community there. It's very impressive. And it's kind of quite hard to know how they could have done that without a mix of loans as well as the other kinds of financing. So that's one example in Sheffield. I think of the old Valley Trust in Croxteth in Liverpool, one of the poorest estates in Liverpool. Again, they had a whole mix of different sorts of funding. I can see that kind of organisation working with people on that big estate is far more independent than it used to be, and is achieving much more. And not the whole thing, but part of it is because of that mix of different funding they've had. So, a question really, the things that we think are really valuable or essential for communities, for civilised society. It seems to me that there are at least some examples where social investment has a big role to play. And if I can, I also wanted to pick up your powerful point that the running current agenda is failing. Personally, I think that's true. I think it was an agenda to try and bring in private finance from big city institutions and from very wealthy individuals to compensate for an abandonment of public service. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And from what I see, it largely is failing. And it's also in danger, that energy and that push behind it is in danger of skewing what is, I think, in many ways, actually a very healthy, potentially very healthy social investment way of operating. So I personally agree with you, and I think you're right to say that because it's failing, they're now blurring the distinction between what is a social organisation and what is a private organisation, and absolutely right. And I think it's shocking. That doesn't, the fact that particular vision, the trillions of pounds from private investors who are trying to get a return, a commercial return in the end, because that isn't working, doesn't mean, I don't think, that the rest of the social investment thing is necessarily wrong.
So do we have a question?
Sorry, that was...
Ideally a relatively short question from this person.
My name's Richard Hull. I run the MA in Social Entrepreneurship at Goldsmiths. Just a quick question to the panel, and to you as well. what would be a commercial rate of return on a social investment?
It seems highly unlikely there'll be one single answer to that, but I think just for a laugh,
Oh, well, I would invite anybody else as well to
who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So whenever people say, "Oh, is it a discounted return or is it a commercial return?" I go, well, the return, a market return, in the same way that the first time I tried to buy a house, I walked into the estate agent and said, "I'd like to offer you £130,000 for this flat that you've got on the market for 150," and they said, "Oh no, sir, that's not the way the market's going." And I went, "I am the market." And of course, a few days later, somebody else stupidly offered a whole lot more and they got the flat. But I objected to the fact that that there was this thing called the market that dictated what the transaction should be, because a commercial return, a commercial transaction is what somebody is willing to pay, and we all enter that negotiation every time we do it. So, so that's our experience. Every time we take a product and try and find some finance for it, we see a balance of three things. One is the connection around impact. So does an investor really care about what's going on? So this is worth the risk. What is the risk? Do we actually know, or is there just a perception of what the risk is? And then there's the return. So it all depends on what the underlying deal is. Commercial return is a commercial risk adjusted, frankly impact adjusted. It doesn't have to be discounted. It's about finding out ways so that it can be compared as closely with something as similar to it as possible, and then you go, okay, yeah, this is the same. So our property funds, housing homeless people in London, we're sell it as it's offering a 6.5% IRR. Don't tell that to anyone. Otherwise I'll get into trouble with lawyers. But it's broadly got a 6% IRR out of it. You compare it to other private rented sector funds that are just interested in profit. Well, it's a bit less. Is it a bit less because it's housing homeless people about others? Well, kind of. But actually what we say is it's a commercially risk-adjusted return because we have a much more diverse portfolio of property. We have a commercial lease, so we don't have any void risk. And we have a single charity tenant who then sublet it. So actually, it is comparable to buying a big block of flats in a PRS fund that may or may not perform, where the tenants will be there for three seconds and then move. I'd much rather have the stability of a well-managed homelessness tenant group than I would and actually is valued by investors. Sorry.
Any other panelists want to answer this one? So I'm not going to force you all to answer it, but do you want?
Can I answer the basis of the question actually?
Yeah.
Which is, do you mean the return from a social organisation's point of view, i.e. if you're a social organisation wanting to borrow money, take an investment, what are you going to have to pay to get this? Or is it more from a kind of this mystery funder somewhere, what return are they expecting for kind of the privilege of helping a social organisation? I was just wondering the perspective of the question.
The perspective of the question is the latter.
Okay.
And it's to highlight the issues, the difficulty of, a 6% return, that's way higher than the rate of, the current Bank of England rate. It's to question the sort of the surplus value that is being taken out of the system by that investor.
Okay, well, I probably won't answer the question directly, but just to give Venturesome's perspective, which is the 6% return, that kind of, I hadn't realised it's that high then, it's very exciting. But that comes, I know, and it's property backed, that's brilliant. Not all social investment can offer anything like that kind of quite attractive financial return. So CAF Venturesome tries to support social organisations which need less than £250,000, which is absolutely where the predominant need is. We can't do that. on a basis with the kind of the loss rates historically we've got, with the kind of the costs of due diligence, which are as low as we can keep them. We can't do that and offer a financial return to our funders that is anything like 6%. And that's one of the main reasons the funders who back us do so with their philanthropic capital. Not for all of our funds, but for the main funds that work providing organisations that need to borrow, say, 100k for 6 months and can't get it from anywhere else. Their loss rate means that the return to our funders is negative. And we're very, very open about that. That absolutely is not a business model that will suit a growing sector at all. We're a philanthropic fund. That's the business model we have, and that's because the aim is to support social organisations which need that repayable finance and can repay it. Les, you look desperate.
No. First of all, two excellent contributions, and what Steve was saying, I very much agree with, because I'm not ruling out social investment altogether. I mean, there may well be individual cases, like the ones that you quoted, where some kind of social investment may be appropriate. What I'm much concerned about is that it's being sold by the government and heavily funded by the lottery and God knows what, as the answer to austerity. And I really don't think it is. I mean, that's the problem that many of us have got. Let's just come back to this real demand thing, because I'm glad that Holly has fastened on this as well. The real demand, as you quite rightly say, is probably for loans or some kind of income, however it's done, whether it's patient capital or whatever, of less than £250,000. In Scotland, we think it's even less than that. But our response to that has been to set up the Scottish Community Reinvestment Trust, which is a very, very different model indeed, because we're asking for investment by investors, housing associations, local authorities, some pension funds, by people who genuinely understand the sector, and that's why they might want to put their money into the trust. And we recognise that there are quite a few problems of due diligence, so it's not a matter of saying to everybody who comes along, yeah, you can have the money, just sign here. There are some very, very intricate problems in carrying out the due diligence, but I think many of us believe that because the real market is, you can say it's 50,000, you can say it's 100,000, you can say it's a bit more than that, but most of the people who need those sums of money, most of those organisations, don't have assets that they can give as security, they don't have collateral. That's what the real problem is, that's where the real demand is. Unfortunately, social investment is not an answer to that. And that's why I think to pour all of this money in, as the government is doing, to widen the definition of eligibility and all of this stuff that Pryor keeps coming out with, profit for purpose companies, what next year's definition will be, I can't tell you. What is going to happen at the end of all of this is, first of all, we're still going to be in a situation where we can't make it work. But I have to say that the reputation of social enterprise out there, if it isn't already, is going to be absolute rubbish. Because people will not know what a real social enterprise is. That's the territory that we're getting into.
So I just wanted to pick up and say something more about Steve's question about public goods and that blended space at a community level. Okay, I'll see if I can make sense of this. So, there are certain public goods, and the one that I've spent most time on recently is residential care for children who are looked after, where there is no other market. We ended up calling it a market, and just doing that and imagining that good performance in a market in a monopsony, there is only one customer, it is the state. Nobody else is paying for children to be in a children's home. No one else is going to invest in the children's home, except what we've ended up with is we've got hedge funders owning clusters of children's homes because the state stopped investing. So we actually have it like the residential care for children is a working right the way down and at near point of collapse of what Les just described. So 75% of children's homes are now private sector. Charities are now down to 2% from 70 odd percent in 1942 when we were founded. There is the only activity in that marketplace is price freezing and dropping, while cost is going up through the roof. And who's meeting that need? High finance, private equity, and their model is we will return our investment in 2 to 3 years, and there is no profit in that market. So it's literally, it's been wrung out as far as it can go, and attempts to use it, to make it a market, will make it worse. That's the nature of a monopoly, and it was flawed to ever think that market forces helped get children into the right place that they needed, at the right quality that they need. That's a really pure model because nobody else is going to ever pay for residential care for looked after children. So the state has to. We have to collectively. And if charities can bring a bit of gift, which is also public money, by the way, if the charities receive donations, that's public money. They have trustees have a duty to spend it in the public interest. It's not private to be betted or played with. It's public money. So that's a pure public good. Now, I think the example that you've given, Steve, is a good example of where there's a bit of a mix in, and it's where our charitable voluntary sector has sat for a long time. There's a public interest in a large proportion of provision, but there is a natural private market underneath. So nurseries, for example, if you take the state out completely, there'll still be people who can afford to do it, who will make private arrangements with other people to look after their children. So there's a natural market, so to speak. And the state can embroider into that, they can subsidise into it, and you can have mixed models that, to me, is similar to what you just described, where it's an entitlement that we can see continuing to be funded into the long term, like people with a lifelong condition who have needs to be met, and you can predict nobody's going to fail to meet those needs. There will be budgets. They may vary, but if we can get the service right, then we will get the business. I'm okay with planning for sustainable income and making the most of a property base. But when we're talking about things like drug treatment, homeless provision, support to the unemployed, these are attempts to tackle and reduce social problems by using a market mechanism that promotes growth of them. And I think and then we're creating another new market mechanism to try and give incentives to not grow your marketplace. So we need to look at America and what's happened with prisons, and saying actually they created systemic structures to drive up the number of people who go to prison because it's good business for prisons. Right? And we have to be really careful about assuming that a public good can be market traded efficiently or predictably to return on the investment in being in that business. So,
just before you take this question, Ben, did you want to comment on any of those points?
It's sort of, you talked about the nurseries and the childcare market. Obviously the care sector market is quite, where we operate is quite similar, where it's that mix of private and public